There was a time when you could leave your front door unlocked all day and think nothing of it. Not because you were careless, but because life simply worked differently. Most people remember the 1960s for the music, the fashions, or the big headlines. But few recall how quietly, almost invisibly, everyday life moved along its own gentle rhythm. Imagine a typical morning on a British street back then. The sun creeps through the curtains, and the first sound is the clink of milk bottles being delivered to doorsteps. Somewhere down the street a child's bicycle bell rings. A dog barks softly, and the distant hum of a wireless radio drifts from an open window. People move at a different pace, taking time to exchange a word with a neighbor, to notice the flowers in someone's front garden, to linger just a moment before the day begins in earnest. Life felt slower, but somehow fuller. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic events. It was in the small routines, the familiar streets, the quiet connections that threaded through daily life. These are the details most people have forgotten, yet they shaped the way Britain lived, laughed, and simply existed. Here on Past Britannia, we don't just remember history, we step back into it. If these moments stir something familiar, take a second to subscribe. It helps keep these memories alive. And if it brings a smile, a gentle tap on the like button will do nicely. But to understand why these moments mattered so much, we need to remember what Britain itself felt like back then. In the 1960s, Britain was still finding its feet after the war, slowly settling into a new rhythm. Streets hummed with a gentle familiarity. Shopkeepers opening their shutters. Children gathering on pavements to chase a ball. Neighbors calling a quick hello over the fence. Schools were local, often just a short walk away. And the corner shop was more than a place to buy bread or sweets. It was where news traveled, gossip lingered, and everyone knew your name. Life was organized around routine, not urgency. The day had its shape, and within it, people knew what to expect. Meals were at fixed times, not whenever it suited. Shops opened and closed on predictable hours, and visits were carefully timed. Choices were limited, but those limits created a shared experience. You knew what was for tea, which television programs would be on in the evening, and which neighbor would be tending their garden. It was a world measured by patterns, not by notifications, and almost everyone lived within roughly the same rhythms. There was comfort in this predictability. Security came not from gates or alarms, but from being known in your street, from shared routines that quietly reassured you each day. Community mattered more than convenience. People paused to chat, to help, to notice something was happening. Word spread on foot, not on a screen. Looking back now, the contrasts are striking. Then, you waited. Now, we have instant access. Then, familiar faces guided your day. Today, many of us walk past strangers. Then, local knowledge shaped how you moved through your neighborhood. Now, digital maps and search engines replace that intimacy. And yet, it wasn't just the structures or habits that mattered. It was the small, repeated moments, the predictable rhythms, the daily rituals, the quiet conversations. And it was inside those routines, the seemingly ordinary, almost invisible routines, that everyday life quietly shaped who people became, and why the 1960s feels so unlike any era we live in today. Mornings in 1960s Britain had a gentle predictability that we rarely see today. The day would often begin with the same little rituals, the kettle clicking on, the radio announcing the news in a calm, familiar voice, and the scent of fresh bread drifting from the bakery down the street. Children would brush their teeth, tie their shoes, and step outside to meet friends before school, their laughter bouncing along quiet pavements. Walking to the local shops was never just a chore. The butcher knew your order by heart. The grocer would wrap vegetables in crisp paper bags, and the sweet shop owner would greet each child by name, offering a small treat with a wink. Transactions were simple, but they were filled with conversation. A comment about the weather, a question about last night's football, a shared laugh over a small mishap. Paper bags crinkled, handwritten notes tucked into parcels, doors opening and closing, clocks ticking on the wall, all little sounds that made the day feel alive. The smell of polished floors, fresh bread, and the faint trace of clean laundry carried from the nearby houses created a quiet tapestry of everyday life. Some habits from back then feel almost impossible today. People would call round without warning, trusting their neighbors to be home and welcoming. Children learned independence naturally, exploring their streets and forming friendships without constant supervision. Time was not endlessly measured. There was space for wandering, for waiting, for noticing. Nobody talked about mental space, but somehow, there was more of it. The contrasts with today are striking. Back then, trust replaced formal systems, presence mattered more than distraction, and people could focus on one thing at a time without the constant interruptions we now take for granted. Life felt slower, but richer. Small gestures carried meaning. And yet, it wasn't merely nostalgia for simplicity. These habits, the casual greetings, the daily walks, the patience, the trust, quietly shaped the way Britain behaved as a society. People grew up knowing their streets, their shops, their neighbors, and themselves in ways that modern convenience and technology have largely erased. But what people often forget is how deeply these small habits shaped the way Britain behaved as a society. Politeness in 1960s Britain was almost automatic. a quiet expectation rather than a conscious effort. You held doors open, offered a friendly word to a stranger, or greeted a neighbor with a nod, not to show off manners, but because that was simply how life worked. Shared expectations guided behavior. Children knew to wait their turn. Adults respected one another's space and time, and respect was built into almost every interaction without anyone needing to explain it. It was a social rhythm that went unnoticed because it felt natural. The streets themselves were part of this fabric. Neighbors weren't just people you lived next to, they were an extended family. News traveled by conversation rather than notifications, and a missing face was noticed almost immediately. A quiet absence would prompt a visit, a check-in, a reassurance that everyone was still part of the shared life of the street. These small connections, repeated day after day, wove a sense of belonging that anchored communities. Over time, these patterns began to change. Convenience slowly replaced connection. Shops stayed open longer, telephones became more common, and errands could be done without interaction. Privacy replaced familiarity, doors stayed closed, and people withdrew into their own homes. Efficiency edged out ritual, and the little acts that once defined community life began to fade. And yet, it was these very small things that quietly shaped British life forever. A polite word, a shared loaf of bread, a neighbor looking out for another. You didn't realize it was disappearing until it was already gone. That slow unraveling of everyday interaction went unnoticed because the routines themselves were invisible, like the air you breathe. And yet, despite everything that's changed, people still feel drawn back to this era. But why? Perhaps it is the memory of trust, of being seen and recognized, of belonging to a street that knew you. Perhaps it is the knowledge that life once moved at a pace that allowed these quiet connections to exist, unhurried and unremarked, yet shaping the people who lived within them. It was a Britain that existed in the spaces between routines, in the rhythm of conversation and shared expectation, in the unseen rules that made community life quietly meaningful. And it is in remembering these details that we begin to understand what has been lost, and why we still long for it. People often say they miss the 1960s, but not because life was perfect. It had its frustrations, its limits, its challenges. Just like any era, what draws us back is the way it felt, human, predictable, grounded. There was a rhythm to daily life that gave people a quiet sense of security. You knew what to expect from your street, your neighbors, even the day itself. That predictability didn't feel boring. It felt like being part of something larger than yourself. Life today is easier in countless ways. We have instant access to information, endless choices, and conveniences that would have seemed like magic back then. Yet something intangible slipped away along the way. The small, ordinary gestures, a chat over the fence, a shared loaf of bread, a neighbor noticing your absence. These moments quietly shaped our sense of community and belonging. They left a mark that is hard to replicate, no matter how efficient or connected the modern world has become. There is a shared emotional memory in these routines, being shaped by the rhythm of life rather than by constant choice-created space to notice, to feel, to belong. People were part of a pattern larger than themselves, moving together through mornings, afternoons, and evenings in a way that gave days meaning beyond their tasks. Most people don't miss the past itself, they miss how they felt in it. The calm, the connection, the subtle assurance that life was moving along in the right way, that you were known and recognized. And when we compare then and now, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. It is in that difference, in the gentle, almost invisible qualities of daily life, that we feel both nostalgia and curiosity, wondering how something so ordinary could leave such a lasting imprint on our hearts. Looking back, it's clear how much has changed. We have gained comfort, speed, and endless options. Tasks that once took time now happen in an instant. We can connect with anyone across the country, even the world, at the touch of a button. Convenience surrounds us in ways that would have seemed extraordinary 50 or 60 years ago. But with those gains came subtle losses. The rhythm of daily life, the familiarity of neighbors and streets, the shared pace that quietly bound communities together. Much of that has vanished. Days move faster now, but somehow feel emptier in the very moments that once mattered most. 1960s Britain couldn't happen again, not because we forgot how, but because the world changed around it. And yet, the memory of it lingers in those small, quiet details. The sound of milk bottles on the doorstep, the creak of a gate, a familiar face smiling from the corner shop. Do you remember this kind of everyday life? Share this with someone who lived through it and see what they remember. Thank you for stepping back in time with us today. Take a moment to hold on to those memories, and we'll be here again soon, ready to wander once more through the streets, the routines, and the quiet moments that made Britain what it was.